So for this next part, so we'll look at the last two quadrants. So we've looked at prepare, we've looked at measure, we'll now focus on analysis before moving on to the actual final part, which is the report. So when we look at analysis, this takes place after you've collected your data in, but it's worth considering as you're also planning what data you'll be collecting, to also think about how will you actually analyze your data. Do you have the resources? Do you have the expertise? Do you have the skills? Do you have the right tools to be able to understand how to analyze your data, and also after it's been collated to then make sure it tells the information that you wanted to tell. So are you able to portray what exactly it is that your data is showing? Will your data be able to show the change? Will it be able to demonstrate the benefits, for example? Is there a really clear skew or a clear understanding as you look at the data and the results that you've collected? Have your KPIs been met as a result of the data that you've collected as well? So your data analysis is where, for example, you can use it to explain any trends that you're seeing. It can help you to identify any outliers. You can sort of see any historical patterns. You can compare it with your baseline data to see any changes, but you can also help you to predict any future trends. So I definitely flag that as you're looking at your data to consider what is it actually showing. So in terms of not just the now, but what could it show? What could it infer for future trends? So especially if you've been able to look at comparative data from the past, or have benchmark data, or can compare it against different communities or different groups where perhaps there's some similarities, any trends that you can predict based on this, but also what is it showing now as well. So you need to look through and identify any patterns or any themes that you can see from part of it, but also understand who has the skill to actually be able to look at the data in totality and make the interpretations. So understand what it's subjective for. So understand what are any controls or what you have in place to mitigate any specific bias as a result of interpreting and looking at the data that you've collected. You'll need to draw some conclusions as part of it. So specifically, when you're looking at drawing conclusions, you're looking at what any correlation, any causation, and are there any coincidences that pop up as a result of the data that you're analysing. Is your data, is the intention is that it informs? Is it intention that it persuades? So have an understanding as well as you think about how you're actually going to analyse your data and what will it tell you. So the way in which your data is presented is really particularly important, because it should enable the stakeholder or the person who is receiving the data at the end to help to actually draw a conclusion and draw the same conclusion that you've drawn. So is your data showing clear trends? Is it showing clear patterns? Are you, and even if it doesn't, are you able to interpret the data in a way that supports or works towards your initial objective? And if it doesn't, simply be able to state, for example, your sample size, or there is no clear correlation or there is no clear trend in the data. I think it's just been able to actually report and analyse and share those findings. So as we start to move towards the end of the session, we just have one final concept to discuss, and that final area is around reporting your findings. So we're going to try and give you guys as much time as possible to start to populate this. But we want to look at all of the key areas when you look at your actual final evaluation, some of the things you should be considering. As part of the session today, we've gone through and actually discussed being able to identify the aims of your project. You've been able to actually, as part of understanding the why, define aspects of what the high-level overview is and what is included in your scope. So looking at that big picture, looking at the smaller goals that you're pulling out for that. What we want you to do now is actually, in your activity, if you switch to the next slide, Ella, what we want you to do is take some time to actually go into your sample evaluation format and start to self-assess against these different categories. So, you know, have you, for example, if you switch to the next slide, we have some questions for each of the different categories, and start to think about where are you now, using that sort of smiley format, or simply just putting a statement in there for yourself to say, how well are you able to actually complete these different areas, and what next steps do you need to do? So as a result of today, you've been able to come up with some measures, you've been able to come up with some indicators. What additional steps should you consider? And what additional indicators should you be considering? Is there anyone else? Are there any stakeholders you can engage with to try and help you build that out? Have you considered your balancing card measures? So for self-assessment against that, for example, is it low, medium, or high? If so, what actions do you need to do to be able to then define your balance scorecard of measures? Have you defined what your sample size is, or the action here is to go off and consider your sample size? And the activity around you're looking at your results. Have you considered what the best ways are to showcase the findings for your project? If not, is an activity for yourself to actually go forward and consider how you actually showcase your findings. So the intention behind this is not to actually populate the answers to these questions, but to think about what is it you've done and what actions do you need to do as a result of this. So the idea is that you'll leave the session with a list of things that actually the steps you need to consider and things you need to do in order to help you then build your final report. This is to say, this is absolutely, we understand that this is not the end of year report. This isn't what this is meant to be. It's simply an evaluation, an understanding of the key actions you need to do to help you to build your evaluation in itself. So what can you do now as a result of attending this session and as a result of actually identifying the activities and the actions and the steps you still need to do to complete that? But hopefully they've made a start today on your measures. You'd be able to actually complete the introduction, a lot of that part, or if you still need to complete a logic model, absolutely put that as an action for yourself to do. So I think it's just going through this list and saying, what have you done? What do you still need to do? What areas are you confident in? What areas aren't you confident in? And what areas have you completed or not completed? Any questions before we pick you off into the final breakout session for today?
Okay, I will send everybody on their way.
So we'll give you 15 minutes for this final bit, and then we'll bring you back to do a final wrap up.